Hello?
Hello?
Is anyone out there?
there?
Okay, and we're back. Welcome to another episode of the Lonely Cast, where it's kind of just me and only me discussing various things that I think are interesting or unique. And just, working on my editing skills, trying to make myself a better applicant for the podcasting hiring community. As many of you know, I always said I was going to do a fancy setup, so this is kind of the fancy setup. I have no idea how well this sounds. I hope it sounds better. It sounds really good in my ears. Essentially, I set up an audio interface, so instead of using a USB mic, I'm using XLR cables. Then you then run all your recording software essentially through this machine, which then goes into my computer, and then after that, it all kind of just works. This is exciting though, because if you can set up an audio interface or a mixing board, you can kind of set up hundreds of them. So once you do one with like 2 inputs like I have, in theory you could do one with 96 inputs. It's just a lot more wires and a lot more planning. So that's kind of exciting. Obviously I'm playing around still with Audition. This is interesting because it's kind of like multi-track recording on Audition, but not really, if that makes sense. But yeah, it was funny. I was listening to some of my older Lonelycast stuff, because I think I've talked about this before, but Lonelycast was originally an idea I came up with about 3 years ago when I was by myself in the Bahamas, kind of as I am now, but like it was 3 years ago. And I was so animated back and then. I need to find some clips. I'm going to put some maybe in here. You guys can hear the before and after. But my word, was I an animated fellow. And I'm not saying I'm like upset or anything. I actually would like to know what changed. My only 2 cents in the matter is perhaps I was like really trying hard to do like a radio voice. I think that's a thing. When you first get a mic or a camera in your face, you try to change how you speak. I also wasn't using a very strong microphone, so I don't know if I was just like trying to be more animated to pick up the sound. And I think the real catch was in the settings. I'm actually not even recording using a USB mic. I had this very small Samsung USB mic, which was adorable. It was like a clipping one you'd put on like the top of your laptop, but it was really small, like no more than like 3-4 inches. And I don't think I did the settings right on my laptop, and I think I was recording directly through my laptop's microphone, which also might explain the metallic sound. But yeah, I might put a clip of that in there. If it's in, you're probably going to hear it now. And then just really briefly, I'm going to switch over to cars now. I got 2 things a little about cars. And planes, I guess, are going under that category. Oh man, thoughts just, they're flying. The crumple zone. Now, when I was a kid, right, from playing your games like your Skyrims and your RPGs, I was playing the Elder Scrolls 4. It's probably, point being is, when you think of something hard, like that's durable, like metal's good because you can hit it and it won't break. In theory. So I was always like, old cars must be awesome because you can hit them, they can crash, and they'll never break. Like, as in, like, physically, if you hit them, or they get into a crash. I'm like, I don't understand why, like, modern-day cars break so easily. And it turns out scientists are way ahead of the game because they know why. It's something called the crumple zone. And if those of you who don't know, not the chromosome, the crumple zone. And I'm not a physics dude, not by a long shot. Essentially, force hitting an object. The crumple zone is designed in such a way that cars are made to absorb impact, so that way the force does not travel to you, the driver, and like your passengers, who are the more important part. So the car is meant to dent in to absorb that impact more. And I guess the idea is, if it was just a solid metal frame, if something were to hit it, all that force would then move over to you, which I'm assuming would not be good. And I remember a similar argument was made once where the black box, in a plane is like a flight recorder, so pilots can record like information. It's like probably one of the more vital parts of a plane, and it kind of indestructible. So if a plane goes down, if you salvage it, you can kind of like see what went wrong in the cockpit, or if there was like any emergency and the plane landed safely, they can still like see how the pilots compose themselves. But that thing's like virtually indestructible. You can't break it. And a lot of people were like, well, why don't you just use the material from the black box and put that around the plane? The problem is, just because the exterior is really strong doesn't mean the interior, where you are, will be able to survive the impact. So you might like get a plane that can survive, get a huge impact, but then you'll have like human soup inside the plane, which is fascinating. Yeah, and they're just like, take that into consideration. I want everyone to know I'm not in a bad place or anything, but my word, was I a happy kid 3 years ago. Now I'm just like a happy guy who just does not sound that enthusiastic. It's crazy. But without further ado, let's dive into the news. So As you know, this is Nick News. I pick a bunch of stories that I just think are entertaining to talk about. They don't have to be the most, gut punching. I try to just pick stuff that, like, I also have an authority, quote unquote, an authority to speak about. And diving right in, Edgar Wright is directing the new iteration of Stephen King's The Running Man. So this is kind of like ant news in the sense that, like, Edgar Wright's good at, like, what he does. He did the Cornetto trilogy, which is Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End, right? Kind of these wacky British TV movies. No, sorry, British movies, not TV movies. Had a lot of character, had a lot of action. Each one kind of had its own flavor of, style, but, like, kind of still kept that consistent kind of action comedy going. And I think that was good. He also did Baby Driver, which is, his, like, really cool musical heist film. That was not bad. And I think if he follows the books of The Running Man, it's going to be a great movie. So for those of you who also don't know, The Running Man was a film in, like, the 80s starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it was not exactly a true following to the book at all. So the way The Running Man works, just for quick backstory, I'm not going to spoil the plot. I'm just, like, going to give you the thing why I think it could be a good movie by Edgar Wright. It's about, we live in a dystopian world, and, the usual dystopian stuff. There's a lot of poor people and, like, a handful of really rich people who run everything. And the way a lot of people can make money or survive is you can sign up for game shows, which are, objectively horrible, but to make money. So, for example, one of them is, like, if you're grossly overweight or have a heart issue, they'll put you on a treadmill that increases in speed, but the more the speed increase, the more money you get, and the idea is to try to give you a heart attack. So it's kind of just awful stuff like this. Funnily enough, Big Mouth, in season 3 and 4, they kind of parody this with, like, when Nick has his, like, weird flashbacks where he's, like, Nick Star, which is, like, the really awful game shows. That's kind of like what The Running Man is. So The Running Man is, like, the hardest one to get into. And essentially what it is you're released out into the public, and I think it's supposed to go on for a month, and you have to hide from the police who are trying to hunt and kill you. But I think for every day you, like, survive, you get a crazy amount of money, and then you have to the maximum is you get to a month, you get $1 billion. And this guy basically is out on the street. Oh, so the catch is you're given a camera, so you have to record yourself. I think it's once a day or it's once a week. The point is, like, you just can't go off the grid. And you also can go anywhere in the world. The show does take place in the US, but hypothetically speaking, you could get on a plane or sneak yourself onto a plane or a boat and go to a different country. So he gets put on The Running Man. And I actually do think that if this stays true to the books, it could be quite good because, like I said, Edgar Wright did Baby Driver, which I think in terms of action, a lot of quick cuts and crazy over-the-top stuff, he might be the perfect choice for it. Also, I just wanted to use this segment as an excuse to say I really enjoy the work of Stephen King. He's probably quite more versatile than people think. Like, he's not just a horror movie guy. He does do sci-fi. He did detective novels. And I think his books are always so easy to enter and read. Like, I've realized when you read books, some writers just write in a way that you can kind of just pick up the book and enjoy it. And Stephen King, for me, is that guy. He writes a lot of books. He turns them out very quickly. It's very impressive, especially for someone of his age. And I love Stephen King. So I'm hopefully, this will be a good change. Because, for example, It was a pretty good reimagining of his book. I'm talking about the newer movie. So, I'm excited for potentially new Stephen King movies, TV shows. I know The Stand just came out and is that's his big post-apocalyptic book. I have that now. It's like 1,000 pages. I have not started it, but I heard the TV show has been okay. But that's not what I heard to talk about. That point is Edgar Wright directing The Running Man. I think it could be really good. I'm excited to see how it goes. I will say the ending of that book was extremely controversial, and I don't think it'll be used in the movie. But that's the only thing I think that won't stay true to the book. Other than that, I think it'll be quite exciting. So the next news story is South Park announces their new special. So for those of you who don't know about South Park, they've been changing their style of seasons. So it used to be, they release a season a year, like all TV shows. It'd be like 10 to 13 episodes, depending on it. But what they decided to do for this year is instead of doing like 10 episodes, they decided to do like specials. So last time we had one about COVID-19 and isolation and quarantine, and that went on for about 40 minutes. So Now what they're doing for the next episode looks like it's going to be focusing on vaccines. I do think South Park still does a good job on like social commentary to most of the degree. I would almost argue seriously, like back in the day before I read the news consistently, you could almost watch South Park and kind of know what's going on in the world. Now you might not know the full side of a story, but I feel like you could open a dialogue and be like, oh, I saw that on South Park. Can you explain it to me? They're also a very unique show in that they can do turnover of episodes really quickly. I don't have the fact up in front of me, but I think they can make a show in like a week. And I know, for example, when they were doing stuff on the Trump and Hillary election, they actually had the episode where Hillary won. And then when Trump won, they actually had to redo the episode, but they were able to do that like in 2 days. So it's kind of impressive how their production works. I would just advocate to keep an eye out for like the new South Park stuff because it is good and it's worth watching. I think they still got it. It's still funny. The next segment we're going to discuss, and like I said, I don't know if this is going to be the deep splash of the episode or just a slightly longer news segment than I've focused on today, is the Snyder Cut is finally coming out. So I thought it would be worth giving a little explanation of what is the Snyder Cut, why fans are excited about it, and just the whole development process of it. So I just want to start by saying that I have not seen all of DC Films' entire catalog. I should also specify the Snyder Cut is a remake, or I should say a re-edited version of the Justice League. We're going to dive into the whole story behind what that is exactly and why there is a re-edited version of the film. But yeah, going back to DC, I just should mention that the only films I've seen so far is Man of Steel, Birds of Prey, Shazam, Aquaman, and Wonder Woman. And I think consistently DC films have been getting a lot better than they have been in the past. I also find that DC films, when compared under the lens of a Marvel film, aren't as good, but on their own, you can see a lot of hints of potential. And I do think DC has a chance of being a great franchise. I think I've touched upon this in the last episode, or I've said it before, but I think the biggest issue DC's facing is that everybody wants to be Marvel. And I feel like that's the worst way to approach making a franchise. Not everything needs to be these huge, big budget, every superhero coming together moment. I think if you can focus on good standalone films, and then if it just so happens to work out to put them together, you should do it. I mean, if you think about it, that's kind of what Marvel did. I'm not sure if there originally were plans for the Avengers to happen, but I think they did a good job, creating their Iron Man and establishing that world, right? Creating their Captain America, like making good films that just don't have to that weren't made just for the intention of a superhero crossover film. And I think that's what DC needs to do. Now, granted, Man of Steel was quite good. I just think that they should have had a standalone Batman movie instead of rushing right into Batman versus Superman. Wonder Woman was also fine. Birds of Prey, I really liked the Harley Quinn standalone film. Suicide Squad was mediocre, but that's beside the point. So anyway, I'm going to now we're going to go into the breakdown of what exactly the history of the Snyder Cut, because it's a fascinating story, and then we'll go into my initial impressions of Justice League, because I saw it in anticipation of the Snyder Cut eventually coming out. So to kind of drop it right off, there's been a lot of hype for, like I said, the Snyder Cut. So the whole story of Justice League was eventually, so Zack Snyder, who's kind of been the poster boy of DC, he's been in charge of, I think, he's when he started Superman, and I think he's had like his hand in like the producing or script writing process for almost every single DC film since. He then was about to create Justice League, and I think he was actually like almost done with Justice League. Unfortunately, his daughter passed away, so he took a step back from directing the film entirely and producing and writing to be with his family for obvious reasons. So Joss Whedon was then brought in to finish up the project. So the first hiccup was, in order to complete the filming of the movie, they did reshoots. So they had to bring back Henry Cavill, who plays Superman, and I think he's actually, the way he looks and how he acts, he's a pretty good Superman. The problem was he was in the middle of filming Mission Impossible Fallout, and he grew this really awesome mustache and beard and quasi beard for the role. The Mission Impossible executives essentially were like, he will not shave his beard under any circumstance. So you can have him for the reshoots, but he can't shave his beard. And I don't know what happened in the writing process, or they were like, why Superman can't have a beard, but they had to essentially CGI Henry Cavill's face for the reshoots. And let me just tell you, we'll touch upon it later, it is very noticeable, the scenes where it's Henry Cavill's face with Zack Snyder's footage versus Henry Cavill's face in Joss Whedon's version. It's a very distorted look, and it doesn't exactly put the film on the right track. So, on top of that, the press was told that Joss Whedon essentially did about 20% of the film. 80% was Zack Snyder's, 20% was Joss Whedon. And even that, it was less of redoing scenes and more just completing the film. So it's like all the film was done, Joss Whedon was just finishing it. The drama bursts out of the gates once the film comes out. Zack Snyder is very upset. He basically just goes to the press and says the film was not his work at all. Joss Whedon reshot the entire film, or most of the film. None of his footage was used, and he's offended by that. Now, to the credit of Warner Brothers, they didn't remove Zack Snyder's directorial credit. They just gave Joss Whedon a writing credit alongside the original scriptwriter, which I honestly think for publicity reasons, if they changed it so much, I wonder why they didn't just give Joss Whedon the director credit and then let Zack Snyder know that they were not going to go with his film. But regardless, the film was given a complete revamp. Zack Snyder essentially was very upset, said this was not his vision, and the film did not fare very well. So it was met with a tepid response. It was about a 40 on Rotten Tomatoes and a 6.3 on IMDb. I honestly think that's okay for a DC film in terms of like their usual catalog, but of course fans were upset, and with Zack Snyder's words, a lot of them were expecting the Snyder Cut. There were these rumors going about that, like, oh, maybe the footage that Zack Snyder hasn't used is still available. We can, edit that together and make the Snyder Cut, the movie that Zack Snyder wanted to make. And I mean, if only 80% of the film was done, we can see more of the Justice League, see the better version, the unedited, pure Snyder version. So that's going on. And then after production, the plot even gets worse with Ray Fisher. He's the man who portrayed Cyborg. Essentially was like Joss Whedon was grossly inappropriate on set and abusive. Warner Brothers then had to do an internal review to see if the allegations were true. Then several of actors from Joss Whedon's previous work, including started to agree with Fisher, including Charisma Carpenter, who was on Whedon's probably most notable works, which was Buffy as well as Angel. So essentially, it's coming out that Joss Whedon was kind of an awful person to work with, and it's been this way for a long time, and he's kind of been able to hide this attitude. I implore you to look up more information about Joss Whedon. There's a lot of interesting articles coming out now about how he's kind of been able to hide his kind of negative persona by taking this argument that he is like a feminist and he's all about representation, but in reality, he's very awful to work with once you're in studio with him. The point of this whole story, right, is just to highlight that Justice League has not had a very traditional production cycle. It's been marred with controversy, directors leaving and coming back, reshoots and re-edits. I'll also highlight that I found a YouTube video, and I think there's hundreds of them online. Just look up like continuity in Justice League. And I didn't even notice this when I saw the movie initially, but there are a lot of small details that Joss Whedon either overlooked or just didn't care about. So for example, there's some minor stuff. Like you'll see a shot where let's just say there's fire on the left side of the road. And then in the next scene, the fire will have moved to the right side of the road. And you can definitely tell that's a Snyder to Joss Whedon example. Another one, which was really big, which once again, these aren't things you notice, at least for me, an average moviegoer, but the tattoos on Aquaman will sometimes change from shot to shot based off of, because there was a time gap from when the Snyder and Joss Whedon swapped over. So the Aquaman's tattoos might be different. Another notable one was when Ben Affleck is shaving, the shaving cream moves to a different side of his face, or he's done shaving and then that doesn't make any sense because the cream would still be on his face. There was another one which I thought was interesting about kind of just the faces of the actors. And I didn't really realize how, I guess, fit actors get for roles, but there's scenes where some actors' faces are just a little puffier than they would be in one scene, and it definitely shows that maybe they weren't in superhero shape. And this is very minimal notability, but it's oh yeah, they just they're probably back to their normal eating habits because they're not on set anymore. Speaking of that, there's also some minor haircut stuff with the Flash. You'll notice his hair's a little different. I really implore you to maybe I'll link some of the YouTube videos down below, but you can definitely see glaring continuity issues in the filmmaking, which definitely shows either Joss Whedon didn't care about Zack Snyder's image, or he just wanted to redo it, or it could have been Warner Brothers interfering with the production cycle. That part has not been explained yet. The fact that we're getting a Snyder Cut, though, has me believe it was more of a Joss Whedon executive decision than it was Warner Brothers saying, hey, change the film. Or alternatively, I'm thinking what it could have been was just Warner Brothers being like, Joss Whedon, welcome on set. The film's now yours. You do what you need to do to save our film. This is a developing news story that I think is very funny and is worth sharing. So this episode's been a little bit segmented. I'll just peel the curtain back a little bit. So some news stories are a little bit dated or have been recorded already, and I just thought it'd be worth just pushing the episode out. But at the time of this recording, the Snyder Cut is not yet out. We still have time before its release date. But an individual was on HBO Max trying to watch the new Tom and Jerry film. And instead of getting Tom and Jerry, he ended up getting the Snyder Cut of Justice League. He got the first hour, and I kid you not, his experience was the film started off fine, but as the hour progressed, the quality started to degrade to the point where it was almost unwatchable, and then an error message appeared. It's almost like a horror story that you would hear like on an internet forum about like a lost piece of media. But the impressions have been good. The guy said he's not a huge DC fan, but it might be the best DC film created so far. I would like to remind everybody that the Snyder Cut is about 4 hours long, is now rated R instead of PG-13, and also $30 million were used to bring the cast back to do reshoots. I'm excited to see how the film is and how it does. Now, this is why I wanted to start to discuss my initial impressions of Justice League. I kind of made a very small amount of bullet points of just by going through the film and, how I thought about it. I'll give you the quick right now, which is I think it's a fine, serviceable film. I didn't notice any of the continuity errors mentioned before. If anything, it's just I just watched this as well as a way to hype myself up for the Snyder Cut so I could really see the differences between the two films. Yeah, so just going through it, no order. Point one, I think Gotham looked really fake in the intro scene. Like, I don't know if it's just too much green screen or they didn't want to build the set, but it definitely Gotham looks way too cartoony. But then again, maybe that's what they were going for. Maybe this Whedon version of Justice League is supposed to be more cartoony, because I know a lot of people were complaining DC was too dark, so maybe that was the intention. Let's make it a little more comic book looking, but to me it just looked fake. I know DC wanted to inject more comedy in the Snyder version, or that was a Joss Whedon complaint. I know testing it to people, one of the biggest complaints for DC, specifically Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, was it was too dark, both in color tone and in the, obviously overall dialogue and subject matter. So there were weird jokes that were like thrown in, like the guy Batman ties up is like hopping awkwardly around, or there's a weird scene where the Batmobile crashes and you see like Batman's like face get pressing up against the glass. I don't know if that was put in for comedy, but it's almost bad both ways. It's either a weird shot or it's like you were trying too hard to make it funny. Superman's face, it's bad. I said before, you can really tell if you're looking at it, even if you're not, like the continuity stuff I listed before about haircuts and faces being a little puffy or tattoos. I personally didn't notice that, but Superman's mouth, I think it's just because it's there's so many close-ups of his face, it's definitely noticeable. It almost looks like contorted in such a way, and his teeth almost look a little bit crooked. I think the idea of using the parademons as bad guys makes a lot of sense for a ratings board point of view. I know like Darkseid's a really confusing villain to hype up, because I'm sure they're trying to do like a Thanos thing where maybe he'll make an appearance, a bigger appearance than he did in Batman versus Superman, because he's like an alien from outer space who wants to like control everybody with an algorithm. That's like the easy version of it, but I think that's a hard villain to sell, especially when he's not in the film. Anyway, back to the demons. It makes sense because if you use demons or zombies or like cyborgs or robots, you can be more like brutal to them, and the ratings board doesn't care, because for ratings board it's more like violence towards people and animals are a big one. But if they're not real creatures, you can kind of be a little bit more visceral with the action, which I get. I think Ben Affleck's a good Batman. I really feel bad that he's not going to be in the new film. I'm excited for Robert Pattinson. I just think Ben Affleck got the short end of the stick. That's another story for another time. But I think his interactions as well with the Flash are awesome. Like when Batman tells the Flash, just try to save one hostage, right? Like, I think that's a really important line of showing that this Batman, unlike the Nolan Batman, has had other Robins, or at least one Robin in the past, and he has this kind of nurturing aspect, which kind of goes against the Nolan's, dark, independent Batman. Overall, the action's fine, very CGI heavy, to the point where it's almost noticeable. Then again, I said I don't want to say it's a bad thing, because I liked Aquaman, and that movie was probably like 90% CGI, right, and green screen. But overall, it's solid. Like I said, I loved Aquaman. I think the Flash sequences were very cool. I think the Speedster standard in like television. I've never seen the Flash show, so from my experience with the Speedster, standard was anything when Quicksilver was in with X-Men. But I think they did a good job with the Flash. Also, the actor for the Flash is great. I'm really excited to see more of him. I know he's getting his own standalone movie, and that really excites me. And that's kind of my like real quick impressions. Everyone else was serviceable and fine. Like I thought all the other actors were fine. The story itself wrapped up, not a huge cliffhanger kind of thing. It was fine. It was a serviceable film. I think the tepid response from a critic point of view makes sense. I think for the Nick Liebman scale, it's definitely a more enjoyable film. Like I would recommend it to somebody. If it not maybe full price of admission, but if you're going to rent it for like fun or something, definitely worth checking out. But that's my 2 cents on the Justice League film. And I hope you all learned something about the Justice League's messy film production schedule as well. All right, I think that's going to bring an end to episode 3. More for me. For the Lonely Cast. It's been a good time. It was a good episode. A little dated, and I have to apologize, I think, for taking a very long time to release this episode. Like I said, I'm kind of peeling back the curtain a bit, and some of the information is dated, but I hope you found it entertaining. I'm definitely going to try to keep the content a little bit more current, or at least a little bit more frequent when I release stuff. Like I said, it really kind of boils down to me being more motivated. The research is like, fundamentally the fun and easy part, and then it's really just sitting down behind the mic and getting that going. But that's on me, of course. I think the next episode, I'll probably do a mini episode. I need to start playing around with some other software, specifically Pro Tools. I play around with off mic a lot, but I think I'll try to, using this setup, record on Pro Tools, do a mini thing. I think maybe just sort of something easy and light, like a recap of what I've been exposed myself to media-wise. Kind of been watching Snowpiercer, the TV show, which is inspired by the Korean-French film that was then based off the French comic book. And it's a very interesting series of events, and I kind of just want to share how I think the comic goes into the movie, which I think is like the standard, like, and then how the TV built off the movie, I think, to make the world better. And it's also a very good example, I think, of changing narrative plot beats in a movie to fit a TV show. I'm a weird advocate about that, and I think we'll talk about that more in detail. But in short, I'm actually not opposed to reading a book or a comic book and then having the plot change in a movie if it's done well. I think there's a handful of examples in my head where I was like actually surprised and happy that they deviated from the main source and kind of did their own thing. Or, sometimes if you double down and go too far, like I think The Walking Dead's a good example of a show that the comic books are over and I kind of doing their own thing, and we'll see how that goes, as is Game of Thrones. I know fans weren't super happy about the last season deviating from the books, but it's just food for thought, because my argument's always this: I've read the book already, I've read the comic book. I know what's going to happen. I don't want to just see the same thing on the big screen again. Once again, that's my opinion, and maybe I'm weird about it. But yeah, like, show me something new, or do something a little bit more exotic or different, or use, the plot beats and change the, like if you have plot point A, B, and C, you can just change what happens in the middle, but you can still keep the A, B, and C line the same. Like, the plot beats that are important may stay consistent, but you can change the bits in the middle. I don't know. I just think there's a lot of ways you can be creative that doesn't have to be just a, verbatim copy and paste. And I think it's almost worse because those expectations then from the audience are amplified. It's a big trend in the video game industry, actually, where you have this idea of what is a remake versus a remaster or reimagining. And it's like a remaster would be, better graphics, you tune the gameplay a little bit, maybe add a few extra things in there, but it should stay relatively true to the overall source material. And then you have something that's like a reimagining, where it's like maybe you change certain aspects of the game, combat style, mission structure, to do something that's like the same overall story, but is just different from the original. 3 contemporary examples are all the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake are rough reimaginings, where like certain plot beats are the same, but there are also aspects that have changed a lot to kind of modernize the gameplay. But certain aspects are the same, so like, old fans coming back can appreciate it, but new fans also get a new experience. And then you have something like the Mafia remake, where it's like you redid the graphics engine and you redid the gameplay and you redid some aspects of the cutscenes to make kind of a new experience. And I think that in its own way is kind of creative, and I would like to see that explored more.
even in terms of movies, I mean, we're getting to a weird place now, like I touched upon with the Snyder Cut, where we're almost getting movies cut differently. And I don't know if that's going to be, I doubt that's going to be a trend, because the Snyder Cut is such a specific situation of having two directors working on the same project and it coming out completely different. Like, I don't think we're going to see like a cut for cut remake of, the Avengers, for example, or a cut for cut remake of The Matrix, because they have consistent directors. So I don't know. I know there was whispers that apparently Mrs. Doubtfire, a film I've never seen, but starring Robin Williams, where he goes undercover as a nanny. I know that there apparently there's some rumor that there was like an M-rated cut of that film. This is new to me, and that is something fans want now that they've had the Snyder Cut, and it's like, oh, maybe we can get more of these second release movies. Of course, it's also a scary in the sense that, movie industry, they like to make money. Most industries like to make money, and it's like, I don't want to see this weird reimagining where like we start getting 2 editions of a movie. I mean, we kind of get that already with like Blu-rays and extended cuts, right? But I don't want to start seeing like, oh, this is like the same movie, but we've like added more scenes from a different style or like a different director. That's just strange. But yeah, this is rambled long enough. This concludes episode 3. I hope to get more episodes out more consistently. But yeah, the next mini episode, which I'll be working on, expect something that's just me rambling about, some media I've been experiencing with, just to practice some more editing software. But I hope everyone's good and healthy, happy, and we'll see you all then.